There we go.
There we go.
Now we're good. Okay.
Thank you. I really don't want to be self-conscious about watching myself.
I wouldn't want to either.
All right, so looking at sympathetic and parasympathetic interactions. Most of them are what we're going to be calling antagonistic. What does antagonistic mean? Okay, oppose each other. So antagonistic, one's going to increase, one's going to decrease. So they're going to have opposite effects. But there are a few things which are just sympathetic, and there's a few where we can get some sort of cooperative effects. So we live in this constant state of, most of the time we're not fully under parasympathetic, but we're not fully under sympathetic either. We're kind of in the middle, and it depends on what's being innervated. If you're looking at something at a distance, normally what would happen for that is your pupil is going to dilate. But if you're doing that in bright sunlight, what's your pupil going to do? It's going to constrict. So the pupil is going to constrict because of the light. So things can be overridden, and sometimes, lighting like this are probably somewhere in the middle. So sympathetic, increasing heart rates, respiratory rates, inhibits digestion and elimination. Sympathetic decreases heart and respiratory rates, but increases digestion and waste elimination. Sympathetic tone. There are some things which are handled sympathetic all the time. They don't even have a parasympathetic component. Most of the time when we're talking about the blood vessels. In the major blood vessels, we are going to have smooth muscle. Those are under the influence of sympathetic control all the time. There's no parasympathetic at all. So, vasomotor tone. What did we say vasomotion was?
Would it be the constriction and dilation of blood vessels?
Okay, constriction and dilation of blood vessels, because when we talk about moving blood vessels, we don't want to pick them up and take them on vacation. We want them to stay where they are, so they do their job. But the way they move is they can dilate or constrict. What do you think happens to blood pressure when they dilate? It's going to go down. There's more volume, we decrease the pressure. What about if it constricts? Blood pressure goes up. You guys can remember that for next semester's courses. That's going to be good for you. We'll say it that way. It's going to be good for you. But the sympathetic tone means that we are always going to have some degree of constriction. So partial constriction all the time. You talk about somebody has good muscle tone versus someone who has poor muscle tone. What does that mean? Just looking at skeletal muscles. Okay. Okay. The way they look. Someone who uses their muscles on a regular basis and works out generally is going to have just general muscle tone. Their muscles will feel more firm, more fit. Generally, these people are also going to be stronger. Someone who has poor muscle tone, who's, your basic couch potato, their muscles will still work because there is still muscle tone, but they're probably not going to have the same degree of firmness and strength. So this is always going to be kept in somewhat constricted. What would if you lost vasomotor tone. If you lost that partial constriction.
I think you wouldn't get nutrients from vibrating fish in the median,
Why not?
because at that point, the blood vessels are constricted. There's
No constriction.
Oh, no constriction? So what do you ask?
Basically, instead of having that tone, which keeps them, it just, the muscles completely relax. What do you think happens
It'd start to atrophy.
way before that?
What do you call that?
So if we do vasodilation, controlled vasodilation, what happens to your blood pressure?
Dilation, just dilation?
Yeah.
That its blood pressure's gonna go down.
Blood pressure's going to go down. If you lose vasomotor tone to where you can't constrict those muscles, you're going to go beyond vasodilation. What's going to happen to your blood pressure?
It's gonna be dangerously low.
Boom! What's the likely result of you losing all your blood pressure all at once? Yeah, let's go with death. It's bad. But, you know, it's a hypothetical situation. So the sympathetic tone, actually, we have to have blood pressure because if blood pressure gets too low, we don't get the blood to the brain. We don't get blood to the brain, we don't get blood to anywhere else, we die. That's bad. How many of you heard of the term shock? Okay. No, I'm going into shock. A lot of times pretty much what seems to always happen with shock is a decrease in blood pressure. So there's a sudden massive vasodilation. The blood pressure plummets, causes problems with the brain, can then go to coma, can then go to death. So you hear about people with EpiPens, okay, when they're going to have an anaphylactic, which is an immediate allergic reaction that tends to cause vasodilation, local vasodilation, because they're trying to get blood cells to the area wherever the bite or sting or whatever has happened. What is the EpiPen going to do that saves that person's life? Maybe. What is epinephrine? Epinephrine is involved with which part of the autonomic nervous system? There's only two.
Oh, not the bullying one.
Sympathetic.
I knew it.
What is sympathetic going to do to your heart rate?
Increase it.
Increase it. So, by causing potentially vasoconstriction, but definitely causing the heart rate to go up, the idea is you maintain the blood pressure until you can get basically until you can get them to medical care.
So it'll maintain a certain blood pressure?
The idea is just it's going to stop it from going low enough that's incompatible with life. Somebody who goes into anaphylactic shock, they have this sudden drop in blood pressure that can kill them. And so that's where the EpiPen comes in. It's less about trying to stop the toxin, because that's not what it does.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does is it keeps the blood pressure high enough to save the person's life.
So,
That makes sense?
yeah, so I'm just curious if the blood pressure drops, then, where does the constriction, like in the throat, come from allergic reaction? You know what
Usually
I mean?
with an anaphylactic reaction,
Yeah.
it's going to be a series of things. And one of them happens to be that suddenly you get inflammation that gets triggered in the airways, where the airways will vasoconstrict and swell.
Okay, so it's mostly inflammation based, it's not really just.
Yeah, it's pretty much all
Oh,
inflammation.
okay, that makes sense. I
But
thought
the
it was more
shock
so on the blood
piece-
vessels. Okay,
the shock piece tends to be
Yeah,
um,
that drop is
drop in blood pressure.
yeah, okay,
Thank
that
you.
makes sense.
Yeah, and because I don't want anaphylaxis, that's why you got the juice yesterday. Yeah, we got this stuff, and it was strawberry kiwi or something. And my husband's like, "Yeah, I had to get this one because it's the only one that didn't say it had cranberries in it." And sure, we look on the front, it's like contains cranberry extract. Well, we can't have it. Yeah, it's obviously something that comes from my husband because he actually gets like a mild anaphylactic reaction to it, and his throat swells shut.
Mm.
But both of his sons are allergic to cranberries as well. All right, parasympathetic. Parasympathetic. The big thing for parasympathetic tone is vagal tone. Now, I know I mentioned vagal tone once before. What nerve do you think that is? The vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number? Higher. 10. Okay. Vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10. I sense there'll be some studying between now and, because that's going to be basically a chart with empty spaces that you're going to need to fill in.
And you just want us to know, obviously, the names and then what they do. So both
The
of
number,
those acronyms,
the name,
yeah, and
the
function.
action, sensory versus
Motor,
motor.
or
Oh,
both.
yeah.
Not just sensory, motor, or both, what it actually does. You know, no more than like 5 words. Most of them you can do in 2 or 3. So, number 4, which is the trochlear nerve. What does it do?
Shoot.
That's trigeminal, that's 5.
Oh,
3, 4, and 6 all do the same thing.
Oh, hi.
What about the eye?
It moves it.
Moves the eye. That would be. Okay, so vagal tone comes down the vagus nerve, hence the term vagal tone. Vagus nerve is the one that actually leaves the head and goes down into the abdomen and thorax. And this is actually going to affect the heart. Vagal tone is parasympathetic. So what is it going to do to the heart? Decrease heart rate. Normally, the pacemaker of your heart would beat at about 100 beats a minute. Hopefully none of you, Kendall's not here, have a resting heart rate of 100 beats a minute. And if you exercise and become more efficient, what happens to your resting heart rate? It goes down. So when you're in shape, you tend to have lower heart rates. Resting heart rate should be lower. That's all vagal tone. So pretty much this is a signal that comes down that tells the heart, slow down, slow down, slow down. You suddenly notice a big hairy beast is coming and trying to eat you. What happens to your vagal tone? It stops and it gets overruled by the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to tell your heart to get you ready to run or fight. Does that make sense?
It gets taken over by the.
Basically, it turns off, parasympathetic turns off, and we switch over to fight or flight, which is sort of the far extreme of sympathetic. So other organs have a parasympathetic tone to help maintain a certain way. What would happen if all of a sudden the smooth muscles in your intestines stopped contracting? Would that be good or would that be really terrible too? Be really terrible. Probably not as immediately fatal, but but it would be terrible too. If you looked at Natasha, the female cadaver, and she has this huge piece of colon. That's kind of what happened there, is those muscles were no longer able to contract at their regular strength, and it backed up her intestines. Okay, sympathetic division can override when we're stressed. Okay. Cooperative effects, external genitalia, so erection involves both. And so parasympathetic is the erection arousal, and then the sympathetic is the ejaculation and orgasm. So they actually work together for creation. Okay, certain things are all sympathetic all the time. The big one is going to be to control the blood vessels. So thermoregulatory. When we're hot, which, okay, we're not in this frigid little classroom, but why would we sweat? Okay, to cool ourselves down. But where does the sweat come from? Okay? Where does the sweat gland get the fluid to turn into sweat? I know, I'm trying to take you back to where I want you to go. Blood. Pretty much every fluid in the body is going to come from blood. So, modification of the plasma of the blood, the fluid of the blood, they're going to turn into sweat. Even if you're not to the point of sweatiness, you may notice that your extremities will get hot because we move the blood vessel to the skin. Open up the blood vessels of the skin to try to reduce the body temperature. If you are cold, what happens to your fingers?
Oh, the blood vessels in the finger.
The blood vessels in the fingers, they constrict, so you get less blood out to the skin. To conserve it, it's going to stay towards the core of the body, and your hands and toes will get cold. Your body is perfectly willing to sacrifice fingers, toes. I don't know that humans get so much of the ear tip thing, but we would see ear tips a lot in cats and dogs, cats especially. Cats who were left outside when it was really too cold for them, they'd get frostbite on the top of their ears, and the ears would fall off. So if you ever see kind of cats with really rounded ears that are outdoor cats, probably that's what happened. But the body is willing to sacrifice a few fingers and toes if it keeps the rest of you alive. So that's where you get the frostbite, where you don't actually get to keep fingers and toes. Release of renin from kidneys, increasing metabolic rates of cells, particularly the ones that are helping you fight or flee. Raises blood glucose levels. If you're having a lot of physical activity, you need fuel. So it's going to cause the liver to release blood glucose. Can mobilize the fats for use as fuels, particularly a little longer term. Okay, so parasympathetic tends to be very localized because we have long preganglionic fibers that go to the organ in question, and then short postganglionic fibers that just go to that organ. The other thing is the acetylcholine is quickly broken down by acetylcholinesterase. How would you abbreviate acetylcholinesterase? Actually, it's just the capital A, capital C, small h, and a big E. It's the common abbreviation for that, if you don't feel like spelling out acetylcholinesterase and your teacher isn't being a brat about it. Okay, so sympathetic tends to be longer lasting because of those chain ganglia and because it goes to lots and lots of targets. Norepinephrine is inactivated. It's potentiated by the adrenal medulla. gonna last for a lot longer. So this is just, I'm showing you, there's two charts here of what exactly is happening. Okay, autonomic neuropathy, common problem with diabetes mellitus, and then a lot of the control for the autonomic nervous system is actually going to be in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is thought to be the area that helps control homeostasis. So things that are going to be keeping homeostasis, it should make sense that those are normally going to be under visceral motor control. So that's the boss. But we get input from cerebral cortex, limbic system, brainstem, spinal cord, but evidently the big boss is the hypothalamus. Okay? Disorders, hypertension. Is hypertension going to be more a function of sympathetic or parasympathetic? Sympathetic, why? Okay. What else contributes to blood pressure? Okay, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. What controls vasomotion? Sympathetic all the time. So even though people can be healthy up until, when they're not particularly overweight, they can still develop hypertension. Part of this is an effect of the walls of the blood vessels becoming stiffer. When elastic starts wearing down, it doesn't stretch, it doesn't recoil like it used to. That makes the blood vessels stiffer. And so that a lot of times is underlying what's going on. Heart has to work harder. The artery walls get more wear and tear on them. And that's where they use the beta blockers or the ACE inhibitors. Raynaud's autonomic dysreflexia. Obviously, I'm very invested in those diseases. More concerned about hypertension, just because hypertension for a long, long time, hypertension was called the silent killer. Why would they consider it the silent killer?
Unless you're testing regularly,
It's hard to really know. Happens slowly over time. So typical person would say, yeah, when I was younger, I used to be able to run up those stairs, but I'm old and I can't do that anymore. I get out of breath. Could be that they have the hypertension. Hypertension is also often a secondary, if there's blood pressure often can also indicate that there's something wrong with another body system. So it's not always primary hypertension, sometimes it's secondary hypertension. Any questions? Okay, I got a few smiles out of that. I can't do the Elmer Fudd voice. So definitely want you to know I think you're here, you know what I stressed. I don't know if you want to stop that and then start a new recording, just so the files don't get too big.